Welcome to Beyond the Schoolhouse. I'm Sarah McCubbin, and today we're diving into one of the most important and least talked about parts of leading a homeschool group: policies that prevent problems. My guest is Doreen Browning, a homeschool consultant who has helped countless groups create structure, clarity, and peace. We'll talk about the policies every co op needs, how to protect your relationship with your host facility, and why great leadership means managing conflict before it happens. Let's get started. Well, hello and welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited today to have Doreen Browning with me. She is a homeschool group consultant and a wealth of wisdom on running homeschool groups well. And well is the important part here, right, Doreen?
It is. It is.
Yes. How long ago did you start homeschooling?
Well, first, thanks for having me. This is a great opportunity to speak to people. I started homeschooling a long time ago, 2001, and realized that my kid, my oldest, who was going to be 5, was not going to be a good fit for the public school system. So, investigated homeschooling, started, homeschooled 2 kids, K through 12, and along the way formed a nonprofit homeschool group and really loved that, continued to serve on the board for that. And then when my kids both had graduated, like 2015, I started helping other people do the same thing. And I realized I really loved it. And so I dove into it deeper and finally started consulting full time.
Awesome. And so when you say you do homeschool group consulting,
Mhm.
what does that mean as far for homeschool groups? First, maybe let's just do a real quick definition in case somebody lands on this and they're like, what is a homeschool co-op?
Sure. A homeschool co-op is where the parents all work together to educate their homeschooled children. So they might offer enrichment classes together, they might offer educational classes, but the point is that they typically are volunteering to teach each other's children. They may hire some specialty class to be brought in, but most of the time they are volunteers working together.
Okay. So at least our homeschool co-op, it was kind of like school 1 day a week. Is that how yours was? Like meet for classes 1 day a week? Yeah. And but
Yeah.
they can be all different. They can be elective or academic, or they can have all kinds of classes, but everybody's volunteering. Okay, so when you offer consulting to homeschool groups, like why is there a need for that? Or why would somebody need somebody like that?
There are a lot of reasons. One of them is structure and organization. Typically, they start collecting money for things such as field trips, and one person will collect the money. And then it comes up on somebody's radar that, oh, maybe we need to like form some kind of entity to collect this money. Or what happens? Should I be reporting this on my taxes? And so they start to ask those questions. That's one of the reasons is that they're doing money. Another reason that they might contact me is they're trying to get organized and decide how they should structure classes, what should their volunteer requirements be, how do they find a facility? There are all kinds of reasons that they might reach out to me.
Okay, perfect. So today we were going to talk about how to set up, organize your organization. Well, that's kind of broad. Maybe you can narrow it down for me. But you and I both have done homeschool group consulting and have noticed a pattern that oftentimes people don't get their policies really nailed down until there is a problem. So what have you seen in the space of homeschool groups that, made you realize like people really need to work on their policies? What has come up for you?
A lot of different things have come up. And I have to say that I was one of those people that's like, oh, I don't want this massive book of policies. My expectation was that we are all adults and we should all be able to work together, right? What I didn't count on was kind of the very nature of homeschoolers. We are developing like a bespoke education for our kids. The public school, the charter schools, the private schools did not quite fit. So we want something a little bit more unique and a little bit more different. And we are parents. And so when we join a co op, we are still in that frame of mind that we want to form something that really, really works for our kids. So that's a lot of times where the conflict will come up is the leaders of forming this homeschool co-op have a vision and a purpose and a mission. And whether they've written it all down or not, they have that in their hearts and their heads. And then here comes this other parent or two or three, and well, why can't we do it this way? And it makes people really start to examine why they're doing what they're doing. And then all of a sudden, they feel a need to create a policy. And that's kind of the start of it.
Anytime you're like trying to work together with a group of people, you have to have common agreed upon standards in order to function smoothly. Like we were foster parents for 8 years and we had what we called the foster parent Bible. It was 3 inches thick. And it was just policies. I mean, very granular policies about everything so that both parties, the agency, the parents, biological parents, everybody was on the same page. And it's kind of like that for homeschool groups, not usually 3 inches, but hopefully not 3 inches. So, when you're working with homeschool groups, what do you think are some of the most important policies that groups should have? Yeah, let's start with those. What are the most important policies that you see groups needing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the most important policies are going to be your foundational policies, description of your vision and why you are there. And to be very clear on that, because when you're clear, you will set yourself up for people who want that vision to select to be a part of your group. So be very clear. So some type of descriptor policy, if you will, that says who you are and what you're all about. And then the next set of policies would be, how do you join? How do I sign up to be a part of this group? What's the process? And a lot of groups, when they're first starting, they just want people, right? But then it becomes evident that they want people who, as you said, share their vision and their philosophy and are on the same page. So another policy that they need is, how do we let people in? How do we screen them? And maybe it's just that you want to meet them in person. That's okay. Do you want to have children that are of a certain age? And if I have one child that's in that age group, what if I have an infant? Then what do we do about that? So those types of admission policies are really great as well. And then a general volunteer policy is a good idea. What is it you're going to expect of your parents? How many hours and what kinds of roles do you have? How would you describe those? And then one of the really, really key components of policies to have is a financial policy. Who's going to collect the money? How's it going to be collected? How's it going to be recorded? And who's going to have an eye on the bank account?
Yes, I agree with that. That doesn't even the financial one is important whether you're collecting very small amounts of money or whether it's large amounts of money. Like part of it comes down to transparency and having somebody who's just able to answer the questions. I'll never forget a lady, and we charged $5 for a gym class, I think. And, it's not very much money. It was for like 10 weeks. It was so long. And we were using it to buy like jump ropes and some balls and stuff like that. But the mom came to me at the end of the 10 weeks and she was like, "What did you do with my $5?" Like, my daughter didn't get to bring anything home. So in her mind, the value that this money that she paid was to bring something home. And that's just a great example of how everybody comes to a co-op with very different expectations. And while I might be thinking, like, that's crazy, she paid 50 cents a week for a gym class. I pay $10 a week for my kids to take a gym class now. It just clarifying expectations. So somebody to keep track of the money is important because it's like a foundation for trust. If you can answer where the money went, then they are going to trust you or not trust you.
Exactly.
So policies are so interesting because I find, if maybe you tell me if you've seen this, that a lot of homeschool group leaders end up in that position not because they have had a lot of other leadership experiences, but often because they're a mom who's trying to provide a quality education for their own kids. And so they have an idea, they want to start a group, and now they're in charge, but maybe they've never been in charge of a large group before. So I have heard people say things like, why do we really need a lot of policies? I think that adults should just be able to show up and act like responsible adults, and everybody should do what they're supposed to do. Have you heard that before?
Yeah, yeah, and that was my expectation too. They should. Why do I have to, I have person A and person B with a conflict. Why do I have to get involved in that? Can't they just sort that out themselves? They're adults, right?
Yeah.
And it is a part of leadership. It really is. Conflict management is a part of leadership. And we don't want to have those policies. And part of that, I think, is that we may believe that if we start having policies, we have to have a policy for everything. And then if I don't have a policy for everything, well, then I don't know what to do. So better just not to have policies and face that. But you can have a very solid overarching policy that says, in the case of situations that arise where there is no policy, the board will take the issue under advisement and make a decision. Very, very simple way to state
Every
it.
group
And
should
then
have
every,
that policy.
yes, they should have that statement somewhere in their group. The board reserves the right. And then the board can simply, or the leadership team, whatever you want to call them, can look at the situation and keeping the health of the community that they've created, top of mind, they can make the best decision for what should happen.
Yeah, I was actually part of a co-op that did not have that policy in the handbook. And one of the parents said, there's no policy for the situation we were having conflict over. So there's no policy, therefore you have to go my way, because we didn't have that policy about the board kind of like deciding. And we didn't go her way, but we did put that policy in at that point. It was like, you know, you are going to have really weird outlier things come up, or somebody doesn't like a kid's t-shirt, or somebody doesn't like the fact that that kid with the hoodie wears the hood up, or it could be anything. Anything. You didn't know you could have conflict over all these things. So having some kind of blanket policy is really helpful. Um, when what this is something that I struggled with when I first took over leadership. You start off the year, you've got your policies as best as you know how. You've got a handbook, hopefully, if you've decided to be intentional, and you get a month into school and you realize you have some problem. It could be an attendance issue, it could be a teacher type issue. It's something that you might even realize at when it happens, like, oh, we had this problem last year and it's happening again. Do I have to wait till next year? Does our board have to wait till next year to update the handbook? If all these people have signed on with the policies being the way they are now, what do you think about that?
Well, if this is a critical issue, then absolutely not. You have to deal with it right now. And even though there wasn't a policy and now there is going to be a policy, you just have to deal with that. And I think in most cases, communities are very accepting of that fact. We have an issue that's really having a negative impact on our community. And as a board, that's our leadership team. That's our responsibility to deal with that because we care about you. And so for that reason, we're going to implement this. Um, if it is, another thing that I think we do is we think we need to, in terms of having a policy for everything, we might think that if there's one person or one family that we're having an issue with, that we have to make a policy about that. And we don't. In fact, I would encourage groups not to make a policy specific to one person. Just take that under your umbrella of we can decide on an issue if it becomes apparent. So you can, if you have a small issue that needs tweaking, you could also maybe change that. Say, we have realized that 90% of our people can't get here at the start time. So what do you think, folks? Would you all be in agreement that we push it back by 30 minutes? Our facility's okay with that? And so you could do something, that's important. It's
Yes.
significant to the group, but it's rather minor in terms of policies. you can do that and ask for their input as well. So base it on what the impact is, how many people it's affecting, and take it from there.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Do you have any interesting, weird, or odd policies that you have seen? I think sometimes, I mean, our foster parent handbook had some real weird policies, but every policy comes with a story. So, in your years of doing this, have you had any policies that you thought were like, oh, that was kind of interesting, unique, different, but maybe necessary for that group? Or maybe not necessary.
Yeah, mostly I've had cases where they probably would have been better off to have a policy than to have a policy that was just so unique that
Okay.
it was odd. The better probably the other thing that we probably should point out is a policy is different than a procedure.
Yes.
A policy might be an kind of a overarching kind of statement that we create a positive community here by offering maybe welcoming and recognizing our volunteers. And then under that would be the procedures that we follow as we welcome and as we recognize our volunteers. So if you can separate your policies and procedures, sometimes that goes a little bit better.
Right. But procedures are very helpful because sometimes well-intentioned people put policies in place without really thinking through what is required to implement that policy that sounds really nice. That's what I have found. Sometimes it's like the policy sounds good, but how are you actually going to do that? How would you recommend, let's say a group has started, maybe they have a few policies and procedures, but they've realized maybe it's their first, second year, they realize like we don't have this. How would you recommend a group like kind of put together their like a pretty solid group of list of policies and procedures, like if they're starting from scratch?
Right. I would say start with what you are going to give to your leadership team. Make a list of what your leadership team needs. They need to know when are they meeting and how often are they meeting and what are the expectations? How will they communicate with each other? Are we just going to do things by email? How are we going to record our decisions? We're going to keep minutes of some sort, and where are those going to be kept? So I would start with what your leadership team is going to need, and then I would move down to what are your parents going to need, like you mentioned, a parent handbook. They need to know what are their expectations. If I don't show up on time for 3 co-op meetings in a row, what does that mean? If my life situation changes and I can't show up for 3 meetings in a row, who do I notify? What steps do I take? Am I just out? Is there some unknown there? So think through and put yourself in the position of those two sets of people, the leadership team and then the members, and think of, well, what might happen, and try to work through those things. So attendance policies for your parents, sickness policies, when am I expected to keep my kids home, and volunteer policies.
Yes.
All
And
those
I
things
would
that you
add to
need.
that, like if the church or whatever location you have has policies, that those somehow get kind of woven into your group policies, because at least in our experience, like the churches that we used had their own policies. Like I feel like we used one church that might have had like a no peanut policy or something like that, food related. And it was like, okay, while we're using their facility, that is going into our handbook. And then when we changed facilities, that policy came out. There were only a few of those over the years where it was maybe it was food in certain parts of the building. They didn't want that there, things like that, which is pretty common that they'll have some special request. And so those we would kind of make note, like the church is requesting this, please respect that the kids not ride the elevator, that the kid, whatever it was.
Right. Those are some of our non-negotiable policies for our facility. One that we had was, if you're going to have food, they had some nice, like, upholstered, you know, sofas and things, couches for people to sit on and relax. And they were very generous with letting us use those, but no food. And that was a non-negotiable. And I'm kind of known as the bad guy. If it's non-negotiable, I will call you on it and say, our facility has said no food here on these upholstered areas. And people were very distressed that I would call them out on that. Or we were given certain rooms to use, and these other rooms were off limits. And I would have a parent decide, well, my other student really needs a quieter place to study. And they would just go put the student in there, and I would have to pull the student out.
Yes.
So that is one of the things that when you have another piece is that when you have a policy, make sure that you're willing to enforce it if it's really important. And your
Yes.
facility policies are so important.
And let's talk about those facility policies just for a second because they are different. Every facility is going to have different policies. But why would you say those are so important? Because, like, what you listed is literally like, oh, the upholstery.
No.
It's not like how are the safety of children or, whether behavior is appropriate. Why are those policies so important?
In my experience, not following the facility policy is the number one reason that you cannot find a facility to host your co-op. We went through many local community organizations requesting that we be allowed to use their facility. And we had a letter of reference. We had used a park and rec community facility, and they had hosted us, and we were just very diligent about our care of the facility, making sure it was all cleaned up. I mean, if there was a mess on the floor, we mopped it. And they gave us a very nice letter of recommendation. And we went to a number of faith based facilities, and they said no. Our experience with homeschool families has been terrible, and we will never consider another homeschool co-op or group to use our facility. And I was just devastated. You know, you want to stand up and say, but we're different. Look, we have a
Right.
letter. It didn't matter. It didn't matter.
I've had the same experience. I've heard the same thing. We did not have trouble finding a facility because we
Right.
had used the facility poorly, but that was the same comment that we heard. Yes, when you start to hear a pattern over many years
Hmm.
that religious organizations have not had a good experience hosting homeschoolers, there's not like a really easy way to like bring that to the attention of homeschool groups without sounding kind of negative. But a lot of times churches or religious organizations are letting groups use their facilities probably at a discounted rate compared to what they could get charging somebody else. And so they are expecting, and you're using it every week. So they're expecting that their building will be taken care of. And I don't know, I think sometimes as moms, when we are busy with little kids, we're just sort of used to things getting messy and broken and like thinking it's not a big deal because at home it's not a big deal. You're just kind of used to it. But
Right.
yeah, it's such a big deal and
It
it's
is.
so much work to find a new facility. It's like way easier to be the bad guy.
It is. And I think as homeschoolers, we often have an expectation. You know, we are doing this on the cheap, really. You know, we're scrounging our pennies and saving money and trying to do it as inexpensively as we can. And we see this church facility, and that's where we most commonly will look is to a church. It's a big empty building, they've got space.
Mhm,
Why don't they just let us use it for free?
mhm.
The fact of the matter is that they have expenses for insurance, for the facility, for liability, and they pay to heat and cool the facility and keep it clean. So anything that we can do to demonstrate to them that we are good stewards of their facility. In fact, we love it as much as
Mm,
we love our homes or some other place
yes,
because they're kindly allowing us to use it and
yes,
they don't have to.
yes. And an interesting thing about churches, let's use those specifically, is that they often, well, they almost always have a board, right? So, like, and that is usually who decides whether you get to use the building year after year, at least in our experience, like the board has had to vote every year. And so it hasn't been just like, is the pastor happy with us being there on Monday or Friday or whatever day we're there? Also about like, what have the board members been hearing that they're like taking back to their meeting? It's like, I don't know. I think until you've had to search for a church after you've lost one, you don't necessarily realize how important that whole experience is of like maintaining really good stewardship all the time that you're in their facility and talking well
It is.
about them. Like, I don't know, just not just the way you take care of it, it's how you talk about them. Are you making them look positive in the community? It's a lot of things because if it trickles back negatively, I don't know.
It
Yes,
really hurts the relationship. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
does.
One of the things that we made sure to do with our church host was as we were finished with the day, there typically there's a church secretary. There's somebody else in the building besides you most of the time.
Most of the time.
And so we would go and, find our secretary and say, hey, would you just do a walkthrough with us real quick to make sure that we have, crossed the T's and dotted the I's? We turned down the heater air, whatever was on for the season. We've taken out all the trash, just do a quick run through with each of the rooms. And please, if you see anything that we've missed, point it out because we want to be good stewards and we want to improve. And we really did have a solid relationship with them, so much so that when COVID hit, they contacted us and said, we expect you might not be, but are you going to need our facility? And we're like, no, we're going to, scale back with COVID. So,
But they were still like open to
yes,
considering it. Yeah, which
yes,
is a
they
big
were.
deal because
It was.
that wasn't happening for a lot of people.
Right.
So, well, this has been really helpful. If
I
somebody
hope so.
needs help with their homeschool group and they're hearing this conversation and they're hearing like, "Oh, we need help with policies. We need somebody to walk us through." How do you help homeschool groups? Do you just talk to one leader? Can you talk to their whole group, like their board? How can somebody work with you to like streamline their policies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will talk with anyone who schedules an appointment with me. I will talk to them and as many of their leadership team. And if they want to invite people from their host facility as well, I'm happy to talk to as many as we can get on the call scheduled at the same time. And then if they'd like to, I can provide a recording for those who could not be there.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Sometimes I've found that people need help kind of getting on the same page,
Mhm.
especially when they're just trying to start from scratch. So, Doreen, where can people find you if they want to connect with you off this off of this?
My website is doreenbrowning.com, and there should be contact information on there. I have a contact form. You can sign up for a newsletter. I also have a contact form on there, and if you reach out to me with that contact form, I'll get in touch by email.
Awesome. Wonderful. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Schoolhouse. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast so more families can discover new possibilities for learning. And if you're ready to take the next step and start your own homeschool group or micro school, we'd love to help. Just head over to schoolmaking.com and fill out the form. We'll send you tools and guidance to get started. Until next time, remember, learning doesn't just happen in the classroom, it happens everywhere.